Marshall Peak Chapter 11. Do good and you will end up being sent to heaven suddenly. A high heaven pavilion disciple walked out to the crowd and circled round. His expression slowly turned to one of mockery and arrogance. But the two Han men were not easily mocked and creased their forehead. "You little brat, walking around in circles has made this uncle dizzy." The youngster just snickered. Standing in front of the two men, watching the poisoned man, he spoke. "Your face is very pale. Looks like the poison you consumed isn't so simple." "Of course it's not," he viciously responded. "If it were not, why would I be here and with my brother instead of at the doctor's? We are here to reveal this boss black pot and his true colors, hoping that no one will ever come back to buy from his store again and have to suffer as we have." This made Boss his face pale, as he didn't know what the aim of these two men was. If it was just extorting money, then he would understand, but their motives were very puzzling and unclear. Just when he was pondering, Yan Kai softly inquired, "Uncle He, did you offend anybody during this time?" "Thinking hard, boss," he miserably wailed, "no one." "Then could it be that your rice shop prevented someone from earning money?" Even though Yan Kai was young, he had experienced many things. So this thought was not impossible. "This is just a humble job to survive. How could I prevent others from their income then?" They shouted out, "Look, trickery!" While shouting, the man resorted to a trick to open the black part of the poisonous apple. There's a saying for showing one's true colors. This surprised the people round, for the morning had been quite sluggish. The Han man was wildly hopping about, while his fists were clenched. Jumping, he went to expose the poisonous truth. Moving like this, his once pale face became flushed and rosy. This caused the crowd to gasp. Clearly they were shocked over this sudden change. Looking at the two Han men, he sarcastically said, "Such skill, I respect them, respect." The two men couldn't help but pale. Not only did the fallen man not turn white, he also looked like he wasn't poisoned. The surrounding people also started to boo. They weren't stupid. How could they not be able to understand the situation? They didn't know what motives these men had, but to slander Boss, his rice stand was shameful. Luckily, that high heaven pavilion disciple had uncovered the truth. More and more people had started to despise the men and started to praise that young man. This young man was naturally easy to like, and with this incident, his reputation skyrocketed. Meanwhile, Yan Kai was secretly confirming his suspicions that they were all acting. They were acting out the play of an honorable knight, uncovering foul play and protecting the weak, in order to gain reputation. If he hadn't seen them together earlier in the alley, he was afraid he would have also believed them. The two Han men could no longer keep up the accusations. Staring fiercely at the young man, they asked, "Brat, who are you to interfere in my brother's issues?" Gracefully he turned around and arrogantly replied, "I am High Heaven Pavilion's Sumu." Hearing those words, one of the men became afraid. "No wonder. You are a High Heaven Pavilion disciple. A dragon is within here today. We two brothers admit defeat. If fate allows it, I hope we will meet again." This sentence felt like it was planned beforehand, making Yan Kai laugh. Sumu just laughed coldly. "Leave safely, for I won't escort you." With the situation like this, and if it were indeed no accident like Yan Kai suspected, then the two men would leave and Sumu would then seek out the audience's praise, especially Boss He's. But Yan Kai didn't want Boss He to be fooled. Before those two men left, he quickly said, "You can't let them go. They are too despicable. Today's victim was his rice stand, but if we don't teach them a lesson, they may target Luxi's clothes shop or Jiangxi's grocery." Most of the crowd, who heard this, couldn't help but notice that what he said was correct. How could they let these despicable villains leave so easily? If they let them go today, then tomorrow they might target another shop and leave them destroyed. If it came to that, then they may not be as lucky as Bosky. Thinking of this, the people started to block off the path in front of the 200 men. From his position, Yan Kai could clearly see the panic in Sumu's eyes. This in turn led Sumu to source of the voice, to Yan Kai. While the two men exchanged glances and quickly readjusted their expressions. Chuckling, Yan Kai added, "Fellow disciple, there is a saying that goes, 'Good people follow through to the end.' Just like how Buddha went to the West. Why don't you and I both arrest these two criminals?" Seeing Yan Kai's thin and fragile physique, Sumu couldn't help but burst out in annoyance. "Who's your fellow disciple?" Yan Kai replied, "I am also a High Heaven Pavilion disciple. I entered the main gate 3 years ago." This made Sumu speechless, for he really was a fellow disciple. Now, Yan Kai came forward and said, "Throughout the land, it is important to be reasonable, while one must also be chivalrous. So, fellow brother, you must not let only me take the benefit. Let both of us arrest these two cowardly men and help Bosky claim justice, while also helping Black Plum Village." With this statement, the surrounding people began to applaud. This filled Sumu with anxiety, for he felt as if he was dragged upon a pirate's ship by this unknown brother. Even he wanted to escape, he couldn't. Those two men were also glancing continuously at Sumu, looking for guidance or assistance. Looking at them, Sumu couldn't do anything for them. "Brother," pulling on Sumu's shoulder, Yan Kai rushed over. The two men nodded, but Yan Kai saw the exchange and guessed what they were doing. He was worried that Bosky would be tricked, so he took extra precaution and shouted, "Friends, fellow owners, don't just watch. Come help us two brothers." Hearing this, he also went to help. The rice stand's youngsters joined in, their hands carrying empty rag bags. He, who was previously abused by these two men, so naturally they would want revenge. Seeing that he had acted, the crowd couldn't just watch, and they all flocked towards the two men to capture them. Previously the two men weren't worried, but as they saw this scene, their faces paled. So they quickly yelled, "Don't hit the face." While protecting their face, they curled up on the ground. "You're men, and you say don't hit the face." Appalling. "Ben, that's their money maker. How will they make it as actors if they are beaten up?" "No mercy from you, Sullivan. Come on, Urza. They could always be pretty boys, you know. Delicious pretty boys. I'm not gay, so don't bother hitting on me, guys." Marshall Pig Chapter 12. The trick bam, bang, boom, bang, the sound of the beating rang out. Even though the businesses on this street were run by ordinary people, they currently displayed powerful fighting spirit that left others flabbergasted. These merchants more or less did anything for money and were generally detested by others. And now, when they were given a chance to release their stress, how could they be lenient? This was especially true for his rice stand's waiter. With rag bags in his hands, he relentlessly beat down the men. Furthermore, with so many people hitting these men, they couldn't identify who was hitting them. So these people didn't have to worry about the consequences. There is strength in numbers. Yan Kai only asked for their aid, but before he could even lift a finger, he was pushed aside by these merchants. After a while, the beating gradually stopped, and you could see the two men curled on the ground, bruised all over. The rag bag had also disappeared. Looking at the men, Sumu's part cried out in pain, and his legs started to cramp. For the men were beaten bloody, and their faces so swollen that even their mothers won't be able to recognize them. Ben, no mercy on their faces. Crowd has the same attitude as you, so harsh. Versant G's, just saying. This situation only occurred because the men didn't have enough strength to protect themselves. Although they had swords, one could see that it was only for decoration. If they could use them, would they suffer these attacks? Though would experts stoop so low as to perform such despicable acts? Now, even though the beating was finished, the merchants remained. The 200 men with their horrendous faces and hearts full of fear weakly called out with their hands trembling, "Su." Unfortunately, Sumu's expression changed and he loudly exclaimed, "What, Su, you want this young master here to give you pasty bones?" Ursa, because his name is Su, a play of words with his name's meaning. Seeing this, Yan Kai smiled and proclaimed, "You two scumbags, I don't know how many others you have framed, but it's extremely hateful." His words were an exaggeration, but for the merchants present, this seemed like the truth. That waiter who previously held the rag bag spat, "Pooh, you trashes, you actually dared to act arrogantly at this rice stand." The waiter continued to let out his frustrations, but didn't expect Yan Kai to expand on his statement. "Correct. These types of people should really die. Fellow disciple, why don't you and I each kill one? That will teach them to break the law again." Hearing this remark, the two people on the floor started to break out in cold sweat and were terrified. They had never expected this frail boy to be so ruthless. Sumu just stared at him, trying to figure out whether or not he was joking. But Yan Kei's face held no sign that it was a joke. To tell the truth, although what the men did was cowardly, it wasn't serious enough to die for. Undoubtedly, Yan Kei's punishment was a little too cruel. Sumu could only ask, "Brother, isn't that a bit excessive?" "Excessive?" Yan Kai just shook his head. If their little lie were to succeed today, then boss, his life would have been ruined. How would he maintain a livelihood? They've already tried to push someone so close to the edge. So, how is this excessive? You know, for every being, every action that they commit will always have consequences. Previously, when those merchants heard Yan Kei's words, they had also thought this. But hearing his reasoning, they understood the sense behind his words and were conflicted. But the final decision wasn't up to them, so they just stood on the sidelines. But when boss he wanted to say something, he was stopped by a look from Yan Kai. This may certainly be the case. Now Sumu was really worried. He didn't think that this disciple in front of him was so ruthless and merciless. Originally, he had planned it out quite well. Firstly, those two men would go slander Boss He, and then he would go and stop them, saving Boss He. Then they would escape, and he would receive gratitude from the boss, thus accomplishing his goal. But he hadn't thought that such a vicious disciple would appear, so easily choosing to kill them. This was far from good. Sumu could see that the two men were pleading him to save them. Within those gazes were signs of threats. How could Sumu not understand their meaning? It was like being tied to the body of a grasshopper. "If we are to suffer a tragic end, then you would not come out unharmed." That was what they were trying to indicate to him. At that moment, Yan Kai spoke, "Brother, there is no other method. From my experiences, killing is a natural thing. Could it be that you haven't killed before? Or you guys already know each other, so you are unwilling to kill?" This statement made Sumu's heart jump to his throat. Turning around to look at Yan Kai, he found a mischievous smile. With the cool face he questioned, while thinking whether or not Yan Kai saw through him. He hadn't revealed any clues, so how could he know? What he didn't know was that Yan Kai knew of his plan purely by coincidence. If not, he would have also been fooled. Boss, he was also smart. He understood the hidden meaning in Yan Kei's words and asked Sumu, "Little brother, what tune are you singing?" Ursa, Chinese phrasing of "what are you up to planning?" Yan Kai had revealed a portion of Sumu's true colors. How could boss he not be able to see? Yan Kai just shook his head. He didn't point out anything in particular, but just continued to stare at Sumu. "Brother, I think that you are a courageous person, but you are hesitating. Don't worry. I am here to accompany you and the villagers too, so what are you afraid of?" "What am I afraid of?" Sumu laughed out loud, as if reassuring himself. He said, "What am I afraid of? Isn't it just killing a person who hasn't killed before?" It was like he was unwillingly to admit he hadn't killed before, in front of Yan Kai. In the end, this person's disposition shocked him. Sumu hadn't stepped down from the challenge. Sumu then directed a cold, ruthless intent towards the men lying on the ground. Looking into that young man's eyes, those two men knew they were finished. This round, they were used too thoroughly. Brother. Yan Kai continued to pour oil on the flame. Breathing deeply, Sumu slowly nodded. Seeing this happen, the two men immediately knew their end was nigh. So how could they endure without doing anything? Jumping up, they pointed towards Sumu and proclaimed, "Sumu, you treacherous bastard! You asked us brothers for a favor, to slander boss. He stands so that you could come to the rescue and become a hero. But how do you repay us? Not only are we beaten like pigs, now we have to die for your crimes. You really are trash. You liars." Hearing his scheme revealed, Sumu was furious. As if their injuries didn't affect them, the men just sneered, and the larger man shouted out loudly, informing all, "Everybody, young or old, today my brother and I came out and caused trouble for you." But this was all at the command of Sumu. He had taken fancy to Bossie's daughter, but sadly she rejected him. So he hatched a plan to obtain her. Sylvan, kind of desperate much, "Come on Sumu, now the MC will get a chance to steal the girl."